Today is Indie Press Day, and I wanted to say something about a couple of books by small publishers that I've really enjoyed recently. I picked these up at the Small Publishers Book Fair in London last year, an event which I think is not running again until next year, 2027. But I've been meaning to make a little video about these, and I thought Indie Press Day was a good moment to do that. The first is a Bestiary of the Anthropocene, edited by Nicholas Nova and disnovation.org. Nicholas Nova is an anthropologist, or was rather an anthropologist, sadly no longer with us, died a couple of years ago. And this book contributes to discussions of that's who Nicholas Nova was. Disnovation.org is an artistic organisation merging contemporary art research and hacking to critically translate complex eco-social debates into operative and provocative exhibits. That's what their website says, and they've done various interventions, exhibitions, those kind of things, in order really to promote rethinking ideas around ecology, energy, economics, and how new forms of society can be built. And this book fits neatly within that. As I say, this was a collaboration with Nicholas Nova, who is no longer with us, having died in 2024. Firstly, it's a really beautiful book, I think, as an object. You'll see that the pages are black with kind of grey ink, so it's a very striking physical production. It's also quite small, thick, but quite small form, so this will fit in a sort of decent sized coat pocket. You could slip this and carry it around with you. I quite like books that are that kind of form. To say more about the content of this, it is really an exploration of the idea of the Anthropocene, which, for anyone who doesn't know, is the notion that the current ecological and or the current geological time in which we live is being defined by human productions, not just human life, but the way that human infrastructure, energy use, pollution shapes the environment around us, and that will leave marks in the geology of the earth that will be able to be seen in the future. So it's really a kind of way of rethinking the human relationship to time and putting the focus on how the flawed ways in which humans relate to the ecology of the earth have produced new forms of matter, new relations of matter that are going to leave their mark in the rock. This is an idea that has been promoted within Earth system sciences for about 20-25 years now, going back to the turn of the century, and really picks up and returns to earlier debates and discussions around how geological time should be divided up. Kreutzer and Sturmer are the people usually cited as having launched this idea in the year 2000. There are various sort of critical and alternative ways of talking about it, promoted, for example, by Mark Maslin. There are huge debates and discussions on when the date of the start of the Anthropocene should be set, and that's a whole different sphere that I'm not going to get too much into here, but there is a politics in terms of how you decide when the Anthropocene really starts. But what everyone, I think, does agree on is that certainly in the later 20th century, there's vast productions of, for example, plastics. Nuclear testing leaves a unique trace in the rocks. So many in Earth system sciences see the sort of 1940s, 1950s as maybe the key moment in the production of the Anthropocene. As I say, critical voices like Mark Maslin argue that you have to go a couple of centuries earlier, maybe to sort of around the 16th, 17th century, and think about colonialism, global power, and how those shape the environment around us. As I say, that's a live debate both in the humanities and the sciences. There was an expectation the Anthropocene would be recognised as will be formally recognised as a geological era, but actually it hasn't. A geological epoch is the terminology, a geological epoch. But that actually hasn't happened. The committee in charge of that could not agree on precisely on the date, and that led to that proposal being shelved for the time being. But in any case, in the meanwhile, this term that comes from the sciences has led to a very lively growing literature in the environmental humanities and in other disciplines, of which this book is a part. So it's called a bestiary of the Anthropocene. A bestiary is a sort of medieval style of text where you would have lists of unusual or weird animals and a mix of strange ones that happen to be from faraway places, like Europeans might write about lions in a bestiary, for example, but equally mythological things like dragons might equally appear in your bestiary. So this is a sort of intentional taking up of sort of older styles of cataloguing life, and using that approach to think about the Anthropocene as a broad way. So we have entries here on things like goats growing spider silk, there's entries on Tamagotchis, there's entries on lawns, all of these things as being kind of placed together so that we can think about how they might say something about the human relationship to the world around us. Those entries are quite small. If I pick up one here, what is this? This is animal prosthetics, for example. So you have one kind of image page and a page of text. This is roughly the size of most of these entries. And then the later part of the book has short essays from researchers and artists, including the eminent anthropologist Anna Tsing, who's one of the researchers who's really been very important in shaping this emerging field and way of thinking. She was the lead on a project called the Feral Atlas, which is a web publication where you can delve into various forms of life through exploring a kind of map of a fictional map of a place, but one which is based on real creatures and lives and allows you to explore pollution and animals and things like that. So this book very much fits alongside there. As I say, I really like the form of it. I really think that it adds something interesting to the Anthropocene discussion. It offers a kind of interesting way in for people, and perhaps especially in this period where the Anthropocene has not necessarily been accepted as a scientific term, that presents an opportunity for us to think broadly about how we might use it, and this is the kind of playful and experimental way of relating to that I think might be productive in this moment where we're not sure how we can fix all of the problems around us. We have some solutions, of course, but in terms of the intimacy with which we are connected to the worlds around us through plastics are always the example that strike me the most, the ways that those move from physical products into the soil, into the food chain, into our diets, and get passed around the world, is something that strikes me as particularly distinctive of the Anthropocene. There are also already rock formations that or things that look like rocks, like say that incorporate plastic material. So this speaks to a kind of discourse and form of research writing that I'm really interested in, and I think it's a nice entry point to that. And that's one. That's published by Set Margins, which is a Dutch publisher and in general produces work that is related to radical thought in various ways. I did actually buy another book by Set Margins, but I can't lay my hands on it right now. I've moved house and I'm not sure where that book's ended up, so maybe I'll do a little bonus discussion of that at some point if I can find it again. Meanwhile, this book is the other one I wanted to talk about today, called It's Time, a Chronomemoir by Tanya Hirschman. It's really beautifully produced, again, slightly larger format, lovely illustrations. I'm just going to choose a page. It's a book of poetry as well as essays, so the layout is also interesting. There are some illustrations as well, which I'm going to find. And this is, so throughout, Hirschman is trying to think about time. There's some attempt here to illustrate time in terms of waves of kairos, which is the time of crisis. Kairos is a moment where change happens in some way. It's related to the word crisis. So there's a kind of rhythm to kairos, and that diagram tries to map kairos versus chronos, which is time in the more conventional, linear, regular sense that we're used to thinking of it. Here are further illustrations there. So really, this is a beautiful book, and I found reading it quite a profound experience. Hirschman is a poet and a writer. She's published various other things. This is published by Guillemot Press, which is a British publisher. And Hirschman had received a grant to spend some time writing a book about time. And in part, this book is directly someone telling you about, I've been reading about time. Here's the things I found out. Here are some interesting avenues of research that are going on related to time. There's some of this. And it's mixed in with her own feelings and relation to time, her own bodily experiences of a long-term illness, which she suffered for some months and which delayed the project. And then the later period when the pandemic started, and other people had to kind of close down their relationship with time and shut off certain possibilities. And she had this strange experience of having gone through a very individual experience of that, related to that when she was suffering with a virus, and then a different virus, obviously. And then the global pandemic a year or so later, really kind of taking that individual experience and making it a collective, or at any rate a sort of relational experience that we could all share and talk about and think about. And she talks about the strangeness of having her own very personal experience, and then seeing other people struggle in unique and different ways with their own versions of that, either with the illness or with restrictions around the illness or the virus. So again, I think in its own way, this does speak to questions around the human and the environment around us, how we relate to each other, how we relate to questions of rhythm, the way that we can get interrupted, in this case, by sickness. Other things can, come into people's lives. We can think of people being unexpectedly sacked from work, or having to care for a loved one. So it could be other people's illnesses as well. I think for anyone struggling with imagining how to think of the time that their life takes up in a new way, I think this book would be well worth reading. And it's very beautifully written. It is, as I say, a mixture of sort of poems and essays, and you have these little sort of vignettes where time is personified and Hirschman is talking to time, and that they run kind of throughout the book on and off, and allow her to kind of trace her changing and different feelings with time. There's an episodic structure to it, so it is broadly structured around the time she spent writing the book. It starts as a kind of diary, but sometimes continues that form and sometimes breaks away from it. And I don't know how this kind of experimental text would work in a more mainstream publisher. I would like to think that this book is very accessible to people. I don't think it's strange or weird or difficult to read. But big marketing departments might imagine that this kind of book is difficult to sell, difficult to connect to people, perhaps. I would love more people to read this book. I think it's an important work. So that maybe, says something about what small presses are for, the kind of work that small presses might be able to put out there in the world that larger publishers might shy away from. As I say, I hope that more people read both of these books, but this one in particular I think is really a very powerful read, and that more people should connect with it. So just to say again, just to finish off, this is It's Time by Tanya Hirschman. That's the one that I would particularly kind of strongly recommend people read. And then for those interested in environments, alternative approaches to how the human relates to the world around us, I think A Bestiary, the Anthropocene is also a very nice, accessible way into these things. Also, it could be a nice teaching tool for people who are, maybe academics in this sphere, or thinking about writing courses that relate to the Anthropocene. It could have a market in that as well. It's also, as I say, just a lovely object. So that was what I wanted to say, wanted to kind of share my thoughts on those, and thank you for watching.